Alright, so welcome to this video. Today we're going to do something fun. Today we're going to work with an 80s t-shirt design. Now, let's talk for a moment about two different ways of printing. One way is screen printing, which has been around for a long time. The other way is direct-to-garment printing, which if you've seen any place like Teespring and a bunch of other ones where they actually show you how to upload your own design and then they get it printed for you. And then you just take a small cut of the profits. That's normally going to be done as a direct-to-garment design. So, whereas screen printing, you're only concerned with one or two colors or three colors or however many colors you're going to do in that design, and it affects the price. With direct-to-garment printing, it's just a straight flat fee because it's just digitally printing the image onto the shirt. The downside is it's still a little bit more on the costly side, so you don't get as much profits. But we're going to make a fun design that's going to be an 80s theme, because now we can do that stuff very easily. So one of the designs that I normally see a lot of, and that's this design right here. It's a very simple overall design, and I'm going to show you guys how to make this design and then how to have some fun with it. So let's proceed with this intro. We're going to be using Photoshop. Now you can use GIMP or any of your other Photoshop type tools. This one I'm going to use a little bit of Illustrator with, just because it'll help me do a couple of the processes just a little bit faster, but not that much. The other thing to consider is this right here loves to have a transparent background, because again, we're using direct-to-garment, so we don't need to worry about the color of the background of the image. So we're going to do a couple steps that are going to eliminate that, and we're going to work with the natural process that flows through that. So keep that in mind when you're making this work, that we can have a template that works with every single situation you got. Alright, now, just because we need to have at least one Illustrator documented up for one or two of the steps that we're going to have, make sure you have that up. You can skip this step if you're going to do it all in Photoshop. This is a great Photoshop only tool. Alright, now your document. If you're using the newest Creative Cloud, it's going to have a big template for all the print and web and stuff like that. There should be an area where if you go to one for printing, for regular print, this needs to be an RGB colored mode image. The other thing to consider is we always want to work with inches and pixels per inch. So that's because we have a maximum size that we can use, and we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. So normal print widths usually give you around 11 inches by 14 inches to be a safe area at 300 dots per inch. I'm going to be a little bit extra just because I like to have a little bit of wiggle room, just in case I need to make it just a hair larger. So I'm going to do 450 pixels per inch. And so that's going to give you a nice big piece of background here. Now if you made this and it had, go back to my new here, your background contents, if this was like white or black or whatever, I'll show you how to do that step real quick. If it was white like this, over here in your layers, which should be over here even if you're running essentials like I'm doing it, because I try to keep it simple for you guys, you'd want to create a new layer, grab the background, and delete this one, because you always need to have at least one layer to be able in Photoshop. But that does the same thing that I just did by creating this one document. And we're not going to save this. Alright, now the layout. I've seen this layout probably a dozen different ways, but it's always the same thing. And I'm going to use my tablet just so we can do this as a speed method. creating a new layer just so I can sketch out the way I want this laid out. With one layer selected, there's always going to be the same thing. You always have some sort of sun. There's some sort of double mountain cloud type thing, whichever way that goes. Whether that's the sometimes I always see something like palm trees. I've seen mythical creatures such as geometrical mythical creatures. Those ones take a little bit longer just because they're probably rendered in 3D and then converted over. There's a lot of other steps. Palm trees are pretty simple because that's just using the pen tool and doing the shapes and couple extra lines. Then there's always the transitional plane that they usually do there, and then there's always a grid with some sort of inspirational text. And that always looks similar to what you can make. Now this is a pretty simple process. You could probably make one in about 10 minutes at most if you're in a rush. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys all the steps here. So it's probably going to take us about 25 minutes to do this whole design from start to finish. And I'm going to talk about every single process along the way. All right. So the first step, you need to have the grid. That's almost always the first stage in all of this. Not because that's the hardest part, but it gives you a good starting point. And so, like I said, I'm going to do this in Illustrator because this usually saves me about 5 or 6 minutes. Anything you can do that's going to be faster in one program than the other, go ahead and jump on it. Especially when you have a program that has interconnectivity, such as Illustrator to Photoshop to InDesign, etc. It makes it a little bit easier. Alright, so I'm going to create a grid. And for this grid, we're going to do it about 6 tall by however many long, and I'm not too worried about the actual contents of it. I am going to make sure that there's no fill, and it's just a stroke of about 2. Now this looks oval, but when I zoom in on it, it's not. That's just the way that the appearance of it looks, just because this is not rendered the right way because it was running through my graphics processor, not through the actual software. Alright, so now we got to distort this thing. Select your thing that you're going to distort. This is a lot like filters, but it's a little bit more on the mathematically friendly side, at least up here in Illustrator. Down here, not so much. So from here we're going to do free distort, and we're just going to grab this and drag it down. And we're just going to make sure it brings that very, very low. And you see it's got a little bit of a distort from the edge here. So just make sure you tweak that enough that, there you go. And there you go. That's your average distortion plane. And 2 pixels, probably a little bit too much for this, because this is all going to translate over. We're going to go to Edit, Object, Expand Appearance. We're going to come down here. I'm just going to create a small little tool to do this. We're going to grab all of this and hit this magical divide button. And splits everything into individual shapes. But for me, what it's going to do is it's going to give me a nice clean image to work with. Now that's going to be in my grid. Group this together, Control C. Go to Photoshop, Control V. Now this is where the interconnectivity works well. Anything that you have that's a vector object, you can either place it as pixels, a smart object, a straight path, which has its places, and then a shape layer. That's good for if you need to have something that has editable elements, such as like some over here in the shape menu over here, like any of your normal shape tools. I personally almost always use just pixels or smart objects. For this one, we're going to use smart object because we want to be able to change this later on if we need to. And if you look over here, it lists it as a vector smart object. That means after I place this, if this little icon is here, if I double click on it, it will bring up this little menu that will then link it back into Illustrator. So it keeps it so you have a template that you can keep changing if need be. So we're just going to close this guy out because I don't need to save this. Alright, so and I'm going to bring this outside the image here because I got a border effect on here. But there we go. There we have the start to our grid. It's not the most even thing. It doesn't really matter because nobody's going to ever try to make sure this is accurate. Now, here's the fun part. This is going to get a little bit hard to read. So what we need to do is your layer 1 here. Let's list this as fake background. And always make sure you rename your layers because it always helps. Alright, so this one, we're going to go to Edit, Fill, and we're just going to choose black. Why? Because it's going to go on a black shirt. It's the 80s. Everything either went on a black shirt or a white shirt or a cream shirt. Who knows why? Alright, so now with that being said, now you really can't see the grid. So what we're going to do is anything we add to this grid, we're going to make sure that the fill goes down to 0. Because almost everything we're going to be doing is Photoshop effects. And so, in the Photoshop effect mindset, down here in the FX, we're going to go to color overlay. Because that's the color I want to use. Now, I'm going to use normal for this, and the color I'm going to use is going to be white because I want white. I'm going to bring this down just a hair because everything can be shifted up and down as I need to. Now, clicking on my fake background and then creating a new layer between these two, this is where we're going to create a color layer. Now this is going to be using our gradient tool. And if you see, I have a gradient tool set up here. So let's just switch to black and white, and we're going to go over how to make a gradient that works well with this, and some of the trickery involved with this. And I've gone over this with my previous class sessions, but for this, we're just going to go over this again, just because it's always a good refresher. Now with gradients in Photoshop, transparencies can be a little tricky. Specifically when you're dealing with colors that need to not have gray transitions. So let's first throw 2 colors up here. Now if you notice, I have a purple to purple. This is going to be my absolute fade. And then up here, I'm probably going to have a different little transition right about there. Alright, now, if I was going to take this is your opacities up here. If I was going to take the opacities up here and then fade one of these to a 0. This is a good example because if you notice, this is a red marker and this is a purple marker. It still has purple fading through there, like all that red tint to it. So if you wanted to have a clean transition where nothing faded in, this wouldn't be it. Especially if you wanted to go from purple to nothing. And there is no option for purple to nothing like in Illustrator or InDesign. What you basically have to do is trick your system to going from purple to purple, where one of them has the 0% opacity, and then it creates your pretty clean transition. Now this is also, again, we're dealing with partial transparencies. I'm not dealing with full color here. I need highlights. Now for this, I think the background on this one, I'm going to go with like a deeper purple. And then from here, I'm going to go with like a brighter cyan color. There we go. And I'm going to create an equal one back over here. Now if you need to remove colors off here, you just like you just saw me, I grabbed the hold of one and I dragged it off there and it disappears it. If I click on it again, whatever color was active at the time, it pops back. So if it's purple, I can add purple all the way across there. But for this one, I selected that one and then I popped another color back there. That's how I do that. Simple gradient transition. You'll see me use gradients in a couple times, and that's how we're going to do it. Now, just remember, you want to start from your, on the left to right, you start at the left and you end it on the right. Now this has obviously a wide range that I don't really need here. So what we're going to do is, while this layer is selected, and we're going to call this grid fade. What we need to do is select the parts that we know that we're going to use with this. And that is everything that's going to be inside the grid. And this is going to be important because just using our selection tool, we're then going to walk over here and hit add layer mask. If you saw that pop up right down below here, it's right there. And it basically uses that selection tool to crop in there. If you remember that from our session 3 weeks ago, that one right there is the one where you got to have a fun little add-on right there. Now, these two right here, I'm going to group these guys together because these guys need to stick together. And we're going to call that one grid. So the grid part is done. That's already a third of the work. At least with the background. The next part, let's add the sun because that's always an immediate thing. So for this, what we're going to use is the circle tool. Now if you wondered how I just did that and where it emanates from the center versus selecting it like this and then trying to work it, holding down Alt and then Shift does two things. The Alt, make sure it does it from the center point where I click. The Shift, make sure it's symmetrical, like even, so it creates a perfect circle. So Alt and Shift, we get to create a sun, and I think I'm going to make a big one, about that big. Now, because this is the 80s, we need to make sure that thing has a little bit of like that faded step on there. And so using your square selection tool, you always want to make sure you hit Alt and you hold it down, and you notice how it brings up your minus selection tool. This is good because it creates your little cutouts. And one last one right about there. That works. Alright, so now with this one, we're going to go to Edit and Fill. And it doesn't matter what the contents are. I'm going to do 50% gray because it always works. Now, like I said, if everything we add to this, we need to make sure that we put it at 0% fill. But I also don't need a selection tool, so remember, deselect is Control and D. But we're going to take the fill and we're going to drop it back down to 0. Which again, remember, fill is just how much of that physical body is there. It's not acting like like opacity. It just makes sure that it's sort of like a cup. How much of it actually is filled that you would be able to see. The cup is still there, the fill is not. And so with this one, we're going to go with a gradient overlay. And right now I have it set up for my chrome, which I don't really need to worry about that one right now. But we're going to do a simple transition. So using the gradient tool, let's go with a nice warm one. So we're going to go with an orange to a yellow. Nothing fancy, but this lets me be able to know where it is. And this is still on top here, so we're not going to worry about this right here. So what we got to do is we got to move this down below the grid. And if you see, it's still transparent here, and we'll fix this later on. Going back to your FX, we need to have one important thing. The glow. That is the outer glow. And you see I already have it set up for all the fun things. So here's one of the pink ones because I did that one template. This is already preset. But this is pretty nice. Just choose a nice, like, not the same color range, something a little bit shifted out of there. So if you did yellow to orange, I'd probably go with pink or red. You can also go with like blue and green, but I probably wouldn't do that. I'd probably stick with like orange, or like pink or red. And for this one, I'm going to go with something a little bit more on the coral side. My spread needs to be only around 3%. That's how much it spreads away from the body before it actually starts to do its stuff. And the pixel size, because it's so big, probably got to go around 235. If you work smaller, you have more range of this motion here, because I think this thing tops out at 250. But 221 is going to be good for this one because we're at 450 pixels per inch, which is monumentally huge. Alright, and so we're pretty much done with this part right here. This gives me a good sun layer. And what I'm going to label this one, Awesome Sun. Probably with a U, not an O. Alright. So now we have our sun done, we have our grid done. Now we got to create the background between space and the foreground. So now we got to create the mountains. And the mountains are easy. Now there's two elements to this. Is that layered mountains are always going to be better. Now you can easily go ahead and get a low-res mountain and then trace it for like the full geometric shape, and I've seen that a couple times. But for what we're going to do now, it's just going to be a simple pen tool mountain, which doesn't need to have a whole lot of definition or detail. Because again, we're dealing with just this. And this is clean, this works very well. You can get more detailed later on. So what we'd have to end up doing is using the polygonal lasso tool. Because normally I would just use the pen tool in Illustrator, but for this we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use the polygonal lasso tool, which again, if you remember, is going to be under the regular lasso tool. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create our first mountain shape. Now what we're going to do, make a new layer. Call this one Mountain 1. And using our tool, we're going to create, for this one I'm going to create two mountain ranges that are going to be there, and then one that fits through the middle. So it's going to be 3 ranges, but the one with the double range is going to be 1 layer, and you'll see what I'm talking about. There we go. Backspace if you ever need to go back on your step. Right to there. Go there. Go right there. Yeah, that's a good shape. And then we're just going to bring it down just a hair. And always make sure you come back to the original. And this creates just a selection shape tool. And so what we're going to do is just like how we did with the sun, we're going to go to Edit, Fill, and make our shape here. Fill to 0. And now we get to go ahead and do one of the fun effects. So now we get to go to Gradient Overlay. Now with this one, if you remember, we already talked about transparencies. We're going to do the same thing here, because we need this to be partially transparent by the time it hits the horizon line. But we also want some of the sun to show through. We want it to have some of those effects, like it's sort of like a glass mountain shape almost. And so for this, because I chose purple for the background, we're going to use purple again. I'm going to use a brighter purple. We're going to get rid of this one. Now, purple to purple, simple transition. We're not going to do multiple colors on this. We're not going to do anything crazy. But I will, on the other hand, bring the point in which this comes in probably around 35%. That's about right about here. And then we bring this one straight to 0% opacity. And you already see how that's starting to have that look of like the mountains are starting to disappear by the time it hits it. And then you can just adjust it, and there we go. Now, never one for having a fully opaque mountain on here. Let's bring that down to just about 93%, just to give it a little bit of a hint. Even at the tips right here, gives you a little bit of like a transparency effect to that, so you see some of the color show through. Now, this goes below the grid. Control D to deselect. That's already looking good. Now I can leave that as is, or I can do one other step, and this is all your personal preference. Stroke. Now, fill type. Usually you're going to have a solid color stroke. This is not what we want to do in this case. Because we already did a gradient fill, we need to still make sure that it does this. Otherwise it'll stroke the whole shape that we filled in. And we don't need that because it'll go below the horizon line. So, we need to make sure this goes to gradient. With an opacity. This one is white to gray. I like that. So we're going to press OK, move this guy over. You see, it just gives it a little bit of a feel there, and about 12 pixels. Always make sure it's on the outside of the shape, never on the middle or on the inside of the shape unless you have a specific use for it. Alright, so now that I have this mountain and I have all of the effects already pre-made, because that's fantastic. I don't have to do anything to this. I now need to make a second mountain. Mountain 2. Now we just repeat the steps. And this is where your little feeling for panache comes right through. I'm going to start this guy right about here. And there we go. There's our shape. Pretty much standard. Go to Edit, Fill. Bring that back down to 0. Now, if you need to ever duplicate effects, right-click on the first effect, and what it does is it brings up your little menu. And what you do is you can copy a layer style. You can also do a couple other fun things like manually select some of your effects. But we want to go to copy layer style. Now select your new layer, right-click on it, hit paste layer style. Boom. Instant double mountain. So there you go. Now you have two mountains, your sun, and your stuff. What else are we going to do? Well, that's a good question. Let's have a little bit of modifying around out some of the shapes here. I think these mountains are going to be a little... I think the mountains are fine. So let's take the sun. And I think that guy needs to go right about there. Now, if you notice, right here, I have all these glow effects. Now, if I do the same thing that I did with the gradient layer here with the mask, it will apply every single effect to all of that with the mask, including the glow. And I don't want that right now. So we're going to duplicate this guy out because we want to be able to modify this out layer. We're going to create a new layer, select one of these guys because we don't need it, and just hit your layer visibility. And in fact, I'm going to go so far as to make sure that level is completely locked before I turn it off, because then I don't need to worry about it. So with this new layer, which is empty, I then select, holding Control, the layer that I want to merge with. Right click on it, merge layers. What that creates is all of this is now one solid shape. Everything is in here, just like a regular image. And what we're going to do is we're going to if you ever Now what we're going to do is we're also going to look at one other way. If these two, press Control Z, if these two were like this and you want to do it another way, you can also go to Layer, Merge Layers. Same thing. But from here, I can then use my square selection tool, select everywhere where I think I'm going to use it up to that horizon. And then when the fun commences, we then hit our mask and it cuts it off right at the horizon line. One little nudge in the right direction and it's seamless. No extra fade below the line. Has a good look to it. We're going to group these guys together, and this is officially the background elements. From here, you can add some stars to the background. You can add the geometric palm trees. You can put any sort of mythical creatures you want to. It doesn't really matter what you do, any of this placement. This is all done now for the actual location, and it does have transparencies on there, so this is going to be a perfect image for sending it off for direct-to-garment printing. Now for the text. For this next part, I'm going to go ahead and cut the whole me finding fonts, and I'm going to find two fonts. One that's going to be a very bold, but has very hard edges to it, maybe some slight angles. I'm not going to choose anything with serifs. I'm not going to choose anything with grunge effects whatsoever. The next level down is going to be a script, and the more brush scripty it is, without being the actual brush script, talking like something that's got a lot of angles to it, looks like it's done by hand, that's going to be the second font we're going to choose. So there's going to be a little cut here, and you'll have to see some text on my screen. Alright, so here I have my fonts all chosen out. The top one is called Bebas. If you're questioning which fonts I used, these are both of these fonts are going to be free fonts and are commercially okay fonts, because you never want to have like a for personal use font for something you're going to maybe sell to as a design out there for other people. The bottom text is called like Font Jack or something like that. Something that both of those sort of like have a fun feel to it. Now, just with everything else, remember, remove the fill down to 0. And for this, the top font, we're going to have some fun. We are going to go to gradient overlay. You see a lot of trends in the same thing. They use a lot of gradients. And then for this, a chrome would work, but for this, so I'm gonna keep it chrome because I like that look. Now we need to have a stroke on top of this, and we're gonna do a drop shadow. Now this is important. It's not really a drop shadow, so we're not going to keep it on multiply. We're going to keep this one at around a bright color. What it does is it creates a little bit of a ghost color right there. Now the stroke, the last one we did was a gradient, and for this one we're just going to do a color. Actually, let's do a gradient. And for this one we're going to do white to gray. Nothing fancy here. For the bottom text, this one we're going to have a couple of them. We're going to do bevels. We're going to go ahead and do a color overlay. We are going to do an outer glow and an inner glow. So there's going to be a wide range of stuff we're going to do. While the top one is going to be like a gradient, like sort of like that industrial gloss look to it. The bottom one is going to look like it's a font that's slightly chiseled. Maybe it has a little bit of fun with it. So now for the color overlay. For this, on this one, I'm going to use, because we haven't used a lot of it, we're not going to use purple, we're not going to use blue, and we're not going to use yellow. Green's a good color for this. Now, bevel and emboss. We're going to do an inner bevel, and right now it's at smooth. We need the depth to be up high. We need the size to be pretty much there, with no softening. And we're going to do a soft chisel. Now, we don't need to put this at 100%. We're just going to do this around, I don't know, 40% for this one. We're just going to have a slight chisel look to it. Now, that looks okay. What we need to do is remove some of these things, because a lot of these, like the outer glow, was set for our coral color. For here, we're just going to go with a nice white one, because we want it to be simple. For here, our opacity, we're going to bring this down just a little bit. We also don't need the size to be that huge. It just needs to have a small look to it. And the bottom text is actually on top of the top text. And you see it's already starting to come together pretty cleanly. Now I'm going to tweak a couple of these guys in here. For the color overlay, that's too much of a pastel green. Maybe let's go with more of like an electric green. This outer glow, maybe let's go with that little blue that we used for the drop shadow for that one, so it matches up a little bit well. And then the inner glow, this is the one we haven't touched on yet. This, we're going to go to right about here. We're going to go to multiply. And this is small. This is only like 18 pixels. Now if we zoom in on this, I'm going to show you why we do something like this. If you notice, it gives it that little like hollowed out look. It gives it sort of like a little bit of depth where it looks like it goes into the artwork a little bit. This is good because the next step, while we don't really need to worry about this, is creating a new layer. We're going to create a little highlight point. What we're going to do is go to Edit, Fill. This is one we're not going to worry too much about. We're going to do white, Edit, Transform, Rotate. Edit, Transform, Scale, hitting enter every single time. Edit, transform scale. Now for this one, we're going to go to a outer glow. Alright, and then we're just going to take this guy and we're going to put it like right about there. One up here. Create a new layer. This guy right about there. Create a new layer. Right about there. Right about there. And right about there. Group all these guys together. Label that one as our flash. Alright. Here's our template. From here we can modify all of our stuff. I think this is going to be too bright. So let's create a nice simple color range right here. On the bottom, on the top text, I use the simple example for Chrome, and I'm not digging that. I never dig that, just that simple, that transition. I like to go, because it's black sky, we need to have a black. I also think going to the gray is good. Up around the halfway point creates where that new color is. See, there's blue here in the sky that would be reflected back here. So we're going to create that blue right here. And then this one works pretty well already. We need to create a black hard transition. With a brighter little highlight, and we need to bring that to right about there. Yeah, that's a good soft transition right there. And then this, we're going to drag this guy here, brings down the curve to be so much linear as it does, like sort of sloops it a little bit more. And of course nothing is the same without putting a little bit of a brighter highlight at the bottom of that one as well. And there we go. Dark text, bright little highlights, works well. And we're done. You can use this for everything you need to. You can change the text on it. The only thing that I would do differently is that if you have this huge image here, it doesn't really work well for cropping this guy out. So always take the time to find out where the top of your image is. Get it down to the bottom. And make sure you crop it down. Now this image is a full 11 by 8.5. Not a bad size. Now, this is our actual image. Now, to make sure that this looks good, I have a t-shirt design right here. It's a simple little cutout shape. I'm not really too interested in the details of this shirt. But if I ever needed to, I can always make sure I can proof it out. Select all this stuff, group it together, do a temporary little merge group. Control A, Control C. Step it back a little bit. Control Z, Control Z. There we go. Take our copied image, paste it into place, edit, transform, scale, bring this guy down. And if you're wondering how this looks on different colors, because this is a vector smart object of just a shirt thing I got here, let's just say I want to do a red shirt. It'll show me how it looks like on a red shirt, on a navy shirt, and I like that idea of that on like a navy shirt. So this one would work pretty well on a navy shirt. So when I proof this guy out, I have it ready for a proof. I can throw it on any shirt I want to. It looks well, it looks clean, and there you go. That's your average template. The one that I ended up making says "Give me all the bacon," which is a Parks and Rec quote, which makes it a little bit funnier considering that's a Ron Swanson quote. So use this how you would. As you see on my example here, the line works a little bit cleaner because I took a little bit more time with it. I rotated the sun. You know, it has a little bit more of a fun feel to it. But this gives you a good start here. If you guys have any questions or comments, hit me in the notes below. And probably for the next design, we'll probably have like another couple more 80s style designs that I'm going to teach you how to make a template for, so you can have a versatile use, change it all up, throw them up on Teespring, and make some money. So, see you guys around next time.